on Zoom, and it's going back and forth, trying to balance the ability, as we do for the public, to make comments, and they've gotten used to coming in remotely. So, and then next month will be hybrid, so the board itself can be present on that. There was presentations on wildlife management on the site. That is a big issue regarding the elk herd. It's nice to have elk on there, but if they overgraze the vegetation that is meant to keep everything in place, that's not a positive. So they're looking at managing that herd. They have tracking on many of those, and they know where they move. Let's see. Big issues today. Fire mitigation plans. There was concern, of course, after the Marshall fire. The on-site has had fires in the past, and we'll have them again. It's a big open prairie on part of it, and actually the fire in some cases is very good for that historic prairie land that is still there from back before the church ranch days even. And so there was more of a discussion about fire mitigation on there. They have been doing mowing on areas that's already disturbed, some of the access roads. And the same group also does mowing at the Rocky Mountain Arsenal, which had a fire this last week, and their mowing break stopped the fire. So it's part of that too. They do have now, or will have shortly, a fire truck on site so that it will cut down the response time. This is post-Marshall fire concern. There was not one there during the winter because there is no place to store it that has power to keep it, the diesel, warm and running. But XL is putting in power this summer, and so there will be a fire truck on site 24/7 at Rocky Flats. Some of the member municipalities have been asking for air quality sampling on or around the site to for the most part, set a new baseline, although there have been tens of thousands of air samples taken on the site dating back to when it was active and then even post-shutdown. And so there was a discussion about Department of Energy, you know, if the municipalities want to do it, they're going to have to pay for it because it's not part of the remedy for the close-up. So there was a discussion on that, and there's going to be there was one meeting already, and there is a separate group that is working on that. Arvada, Broomfield, and Boulder are part of that discussion. If the council wishes, we can also be part of that. And staff member Trey Nance was on the call today too. So if there's willingness for us to continue to be part of that discussion, you know, then it will have a budget attached to it because DOE and EPA or CDPHE, the three main caretakers, will not be paying for that. So, and then we had a presentation by CDPHE, Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment, and talking about the number one topic is PFAS, PFOS, talking about especially there is a significant contamination on the central operating unit where they did firefighting training, and they used foams, and so that has been, they know there is no significant contamination off-site, but the problem with those chemicals is they're everywhere, they're ubiquitous. And so trying to even get a testing sample, they talked about the fact that, you know, you have a knife that you're going to do samples with, and it's got PFAS as part of its manufacturing. So they've been, they did some testing of the elk because here again, they are out there, they're ingesting, they're moving around. So they did samples on that, and that report should be back out in about 60 days from the lab. And then we'll get it the quarter after that as part of the Stewardship Council. And there was new testing done, and that should be back from the lab. As far as the Greenway Belt that we've had a discussion about access to that on the far east side of the open area. And so every time they've moved the track a little bit to move it out even further. So then they had to do significant more ground samplings, and that will be published shortly as well. The preliminary one is they found nothing over baseline radiation. So that part continues, and the next meeting will be in June.
Any questions? So do you need us to say if we want in or out?
Yes.
What's
And
your
that's just part of the discussion part of that.
And what's your recommendation? Or do you have one?
My concern about that too is a lot of it has to do and was brought on by concerns about fire. And, and then being able to, there's a lot of, no matter what happens on Rocky Flats, there's a certain amount and always will be amount of distrust because of what happened out there and the cover-ups and those issues. And so having good information as for our baseline to talk to our residents. The thing is if there is a fire, it'll be, okay, which way's the wind blowing that day? And is it going to hit a monitor? And so that's, we'd have to, I think even if we had 5 monitors, in each one of the cities, it still would not be, it'd be hit and miss. So I don't know yet. Here again, I think we should be part of that discussion, and then we can see where we're at that time, and then we can get more information and make a balanced and then budgetary thought on that too.
Mr. Frankel, do you have any concerns if we're in or out, or?
I think it may be helpful for the city to be in the loop as far as the communication that this group facilitates. So if the council's willing to continue, there could be benefits there.
Councilor Evans, any thoughts?
I'll follow Councilor Seymour's lead since has the most info about it.
Councilor Baker?
That's off to Councilor Seymour.
Mayor Pro Tem?
I had a quick historical question. I seem to recall when I was very first on council, there was talk by, I guess it was Department of Wildlife or whoever manages the site about doing a controlled burn, and that plan was squashed because there was concern about what a controlled burn would put into the air. I mean, is that going to be part of the discussion, or? And I don't know how much of that was factual versus what was out in the sphere about Rocky Flats, because there's a lot of things that are said about Rocky Flats.
It was absolutely factual, and that still comes up about every other quarter, at least once a year since I've been on there, is about a controlled burn, because there was significant pushback. And the discussion today is, wildlife would love to do that, even, not one massive one, but small controlled burns, but just to restore the prairie as it is. But the pushback, especially I think the Arvada direction, because they're downwind, was significant. And that, every year that comes up, hey, remember when we tried to do this? And so, yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, because I remember there were multiple different, like they talked about goats, and then the same question, like, okay, you put them out there if there's something dangerous in the grasslands or whatever. So I guess in short, I think that we do, in my opinion, need to be at the table, because, I mean, at some point, somebody's going to have to take the responsibility to figure out how they manage it, because I feel like if they don't do something to manage it out there, it's just continues to be worse of a risk in my mind. So I hope that, it's to me, it's disappointing. Here we are 5 years later that they haven't come up with, a different way to do what they were trying to accomplish with the burn. So I'd be in favor of, the more information, the better for us at this point, and especially since at this point it's just keeping our thumb on it.
Councilor Neville?
I share a similar sentiment, so I would hope we'd stay in.
Councilor Baker, you have something else?
I think it's worthwhile to remember that part of the problem at the Rocky Flats is the divided responsibility. The Central Operating Units Department of Energy, what used to be the buffer zone is all Forest Service, and they think there's nothing wrong with the property, even though there is a significant fallout pattern that extends into the buffer zone and was never cleaned up. And that's where the concern comes from. And of course, Rocky Flats Stewardship Council has no authority to do anything. They can't even recommend.
Yeah, I think that's a fair point. I did serve on that when I was very first on, so I got to go and tour and hear the complexities. I mean, such is government, unfortunately.
There was significant pushback from the council regarding the location of the Beltway and moving that out significantly and staying out of that downwind area, as so to speak. But yeah, the other side of that is if the Stewardship Council's member governments came up and said, we understand and we believe we can sell the idea of controlled burn with the scientific information, then I think they would do it. But if there's not a political will from the member municipalities, I don't think they're gonna try to broach that again. They don't wanna take that kind of beating, so.
So I've heard, because I agree, we need to stay in communication, so I hear all of us saying that, and then if a decision needs to be made, we discuss that later.
Okay.
Thank you. Anything else?
No, just not as far as report outs. I did want to make a couple comments, recognizing the reports that we got this last week from fire and PD as far as what went on, and I do appreciate the fact that our firefighters made 2 significant saves of lives on that report, and I was very heartened to see that in about every one of the beats, one of the significant contacts was traffic. So appreciate that, and I know our residents do too.
Mr. Emmons?
Not much to update other than on Thursday, we celebrated one of our outgoing Historic Landmark Board members, Karen Hardy, for her years of service on the board. She had several years. And she's one of our invaluable members. They're all valuable, but she had specific career history experience to be able to be serving on the board. This is one of the boards that we have that requires a background in either architecture, historic, or I think some kind of art history background requirement to be on the board. We have 2 members, or a requirement that 2 members are always on that have that kind of institutional knowledge, and she was one of them. So celebrated her on Thursday, and then just Councilor Seymour and I attended the CML town hall regarding the land use legislation, and we provided those notes to y'all. I'm sure we'll talk about it more tonight. So that's it.
Thanks. Any questions for Councilor Emmons? Councilor Baker?
I just wanted to emphasize, the importance of the Dr. Cog meeting coming up, and we need to give our representative clear understanding, but as Councilor Emmons said, we'll be talking about that later, tonight, when we give our lobbyists clear direction.
Mayor Pro Tem?
I had Environmental Advisory Board on Wednesday. They talked about that they're going to be doing during the Great Global Cleanup. They'll be at Westminster Station Park. They shared with me that the group went and toured the wastewater treatment plant on Huron. They had great feedback. They were very impressed with our operation there and our staff. So kudos to staff that run that. They really enjoyed the tour that they took. And then 2 things I wanted to bring back. One was they had talked about how, and I thought this was a really good point, and I don't know if maybe this is going to be with the clerk's office, but about tracking the hours with the boards and commissions. I know that we do that with the volunteer group, but I guess the board had been asked about making sure that they're tracking their hours. So, and I don't know if that's something that they do today. I know that, that was brought up, so about how they do that. And I wanted to at least make it part of the discussion because it's a neat thing that the Butterfly Pavilion, I recently was attended their board meeting too, and they do a similar thing where the board has to say how many hours you spent on things and contacts you've made. They actually have an online form now that they have like a QR code that every week they flash that up on the display. Everybody clicks the QR code, goes in and puts in their monthly information. But I wanted to bring that back. And then the last thing, I emailed the council rough outline that Chris Stimson, who's the chair of the EAB, had sent to me about a potential program that they were looking at doing inside of schools. And so they had asked me about getting feedback and whether or not that's something that the council wants them doing or not. And so I did promise that I would try to gather feedback. And so I had given you guys a heads up that I would be asking that tonight.
Any thoughts? I had a couple. I'm not sure that we're the ones that mandate that they go into schools. Schools at this time of year have testing protocols happening, graduations happening, proms happening. They're busy folks, and so what I'd like to see is, we know from all the emails we've gotten to put things on our calendar, there are more than enough outreach and things happening throughout the city where if they set up, and I would think for one of our boards, we wouldn't charge them for setting up a tent and having activities to either answer questions, have the kids do it, sort of a hands-on learning experience and one-on-one with them at any of our many, many events where kids are. To me, that might be just as resourceful as trying to fit into a school right now. And we don't know if they will or won't be accepted. Mr. Seymour, anything? Anything?
I would agree with you. I think if they're at already planned events that the city is hosting, that would make sense for us to be at. Outside of that, it doesn't quite make sense that there's further outreach. So I agree.
Agreed.
Sorry, I'm still looking for this email. I guess with respect to all of the, maybe you could clarify for me, so I'm sorry that somehow I missed this one. Are they're just looking to go into schools and do presentations on the variety
Yeah, and they had,
of
and I don't
things?
remember off the top of my head all the information that they thought would be relevant, but I mean, it's around environmental issues. And I think it's to bring awareness to environmental issues. So, and the idea was to go into schools. I think that there was some work with Adams 12 to potentially get in there. I don't know how, I don't recall other connections, and that doesn't mean that they didn't say there were, but, so I mean, in that handout, or the email I sent, that was kind of the rough outline of what they had talked about, potentially the content being.
Well, I think if somewhere in between of just going into schools, but there's probably school events that they could show up at. But probably one of the better things might be to have a, EAB presence at some kid school-oriented events. So I'm not too far off of where you guys are at. Because otherwise I think we'd have to have staff, I think, work with the EAB and just make sure that the content is, factual and, kind of in line with our policies and what we're doing. That may need to be done anyway. So yeah, if there's I would just open it up to school events too. I mean, that's and maybe they know more of what those could be through Adams, their connections with Adams 12.
And so, just so to clarify, so I'm thinking when you say that, like things like when they have like political science fairs or, fairs where there are booths with outside vendor kind of thing versus, us just kind of cold going in. Is that kind of what you mean?
Yeah, like an organized, sure they must have.
Would that meet the needs that we heard from other members?
Yeah, give them all those choices, because schools have different events, whether it's a sporting event or whatever. Some parents will be thrilled to have kids be able to go over to a booth and have something to do if they don't want to want brother and sister, whatever their athletic sport is. So.
And we'd be given the really presentation first.
Yeah, I mean, and that was the part of the intent in giving you the outline was to make sure that there wasn't any content that they were thinking about talking that there was a problem with. I mean, at least that was how I took it. So, if you have specific feedback on that, I would welcome that too, and I would be happy to share that back with the board. Hearing what you guys are saying, to me, I would agree with that just because it's in line with the goals they were trying to develop. There was talk about what kind of events they could go to, and so I was sharing with them some of the stuff I know that was coming across. I also shared with them that there was a concerted effort to try to narrow the events so that you could get more people and they weren't so spread out. I used the police department, partnering with some of the movies in the park. So I thought that was a good opportunity for them to be able to have a table. One of my suggestions was, I mean, we have so many different programs, and them doing that, being after those issues, that'd be a good opportunity to share with the public the different programs we have that are in line with environmental issues. So I think I saw that Chris was here, but I'll be sure that we share this feedback back with the group.
And what's Stanley's dog?
Jog in the bog.
Jog in the
Jog in the
bog.
Bog.
I mean,
It's a big turnout.
Yeah, Stanley's got a couple of different big things like that where they can have a booth outside and everybody's there, and
So that was that, and they are working on developing goals, and they'll have something. And I shared with them, just like I had shared with you all with the inclusivity board, that just getting something back to Cody that was due last week so that we could at least look at it, because we may have feedback anyway, but both groups still had to kind of be able to vote on it. But it makes sense to get some feedback from us, so I shared that with them. And then the last thing, I wanted to pile on with what Councilor Seymour said. I have visibly seen a lot more speed enforcement and heard good feedback for that, so I wanted to show some appreciation to the police department, because I know the council had asked about that a couple weeks ago, and I have seen it, so I appreciate the extra effort around that, because I certainly personally see a lot of reckless behavior still, and I get a lot of complaints about it. So I think hopefully that will start helping people remember about driving safely in our city.
Councilor Mello.
And on to that, yes, particularly in areas where we have repeat offenders. We just had another resident talking about how their backyard has been crashed into multiple times, and that's just, that's an area where hopefully we're prioritizing. If there are habitual speed areas, that we're prioritizing our speed mitigation efforts there. I won't go into all my notes from the National League of Cities sessions, because I bet you money that our staff is already kind of well aware of some of the funding opportunities. But I'll just highlight, I think there were some, to the extent that there's a website that the government has set up for the infrastructure bill it's called localinfrastructure.org, and we can actually go in and find areas where we might be able to get grant funds. They have geographically mapped areas based on need, and so I think it's a good tool. And while, from what I understand, it feels like as a larger city, we may not have a lot of opportunity for assistance with our infrastructure needs, that there may be more focused areas within the city based on need that we could tap into some improvements. So it may not, like I said, be 150 million, but it might be, a sewer or water main improvement that, or maybe even, I don't know whether it extends into some of our overhead utility lines, and if that's sort of covered under this infrastructure bill. But I would say that the areas where we do have overhead lines, like that might show up in this, in their mapping. So I would just encourage us to look there. Sorry. One thing that was, I think, useful for every city is the COPS office. it's the, oh gosh, it's, I didn't write down what the acronym is, so, but it's for police. It's basically focusing on crime control and recruitment and retention, and they're pulling together a lot of programs and technical assistance that I think maybe we could tap into. It's called they have a technical assistance committee under CRI, and that, I thought I took better notes. Man, I didn't write down anything from the acronyms, apologies. But they are providing assistance with hiring programs, community policing, mental wellness, active shooters, school violence, and just overall technical assistance. So maybe that's something that we could tap into. And it was just helpful hearing from what other cities are doing. Charleston, West Virginia is doing a lot with respect to addiction response, where, and maybe we're doing something kind of similar, but they do follow up within 24 hours of an incident that involves a mental wellness or a mental health event, and they follow up with wraparound services, and they've actually put a lot of people into recovery that way versus losing them over time. So that quick response is really helpful. And apparently HUD has also, the Housing and Urban Development Office is, they're setting aside $10 billion towards down payment assistance. So that would be, I don't know how exactly they're going to filter that to states and then communities, but that would be something probably of interest for us. And then while I was gone, I did happen to, still listen to our meeting, because I apparently can't get enough. And so I did just want to clarify, I think some kind of harsh words were used, and with respect to using the word hate, and I think that's a very strong word, and that's never something that I represent or feel, especially with my fellow counselors. So I just wanted to make sure that was clear, that I wasn't here to respond back, but know that I do not hate anyone on this council, and I truly enjoy working with you all. So just wanted to make that clear. Thanks.
For me, been living and breathing 213, and we're going to be discussing it as soon as I shut up, but Metro Mayors is dealing with it, and I can't keep up with their emails. CML, I just encourage everybody sitting here, we all got emails today. If you didn't email me, and I will forward it to you, but they have letters in opposing, if that's where we go tonight. And so I have a Metro Mayors meeting Wednesday. The CML stuff is in the works, and they want it by the 6th. And then Thursday I have Yappers. That's my happy place. That's our youth advisory panel. City manager.
Good evening, Mayor, Mayor Pro Tem, councilors. Some updates for everybody, if we could go to the next slide. So you've probably heard this term, emerald ash borer, or EAB. It's arrived here in Westminster, and so we're going to have to work through removing some of the ash trees that have become infected, those that aren't treated or are well beyond the ability to treat them and keep them alive. And so you'll see city foresters out removing some of those trees across our city. The intent is to, once they get to a certain point, to get them out of the urban canopy so that they don't infect other trees. And so we'll begin that process here this spring. When we take out a tree, we'll backfill that with a diverse tree, something that will give us a little bit more variety and a healthier urban canopy across our community. So expect to see that happen. And there's a pretty good picture of what the emerald ash borer does below the bark to the tree on the inside right there. And so just FYI. Next item on there is the Teen Police Academy, and so kudos to Westminster Police Department School Resource Officer team. They're partnering with their counterparts at Arvada Police Department to hold a teen academy from June 5th to the 9th. And this allows teens to familiarize themselves with their local police departments and certainly to build trust in law enforcement. So excited about that partnership. Next slide. Also, I included these two updates in our COW update to the council on Friday, but wanted to make sure that we shared these with the community because I know that they're properties that a lot of people see and they're certainly visible. And so the Holtzclaw property is at 1115 Sheridan and on the east side of the west side of Sheridan. And so the current property owners for that property are contracting grinding services to mulch much of the material on site. Their negotiations are ongoing between the current property owner and a prospective owner to finalize what that cleanup looks like and what the costs are going to be, who's going to pay for what. And there will be a required virtual neighborhood meeting on the project's ODP. That will be on April 6th, and that's on the city's website, and it's referred to as Semper Garden. So if anybody wants to listen to that. Also, the Diekman property, which is down on 92nd Avenue, right in front of Tri-City Baptist Church. So the city has an environmental cleanup consultant that completed new soil testing and spill delineation, and it appears that there's only minor changes to the original spill boundaries, so that's good news. Consultant will file an amended cleanup plan to CDPHE, and then they have 90 days to review and approve the city's permit application. And then we're out working on a request for contractor bids to perform the mitigation work based upon that plan. And so continuing to move forward with the process, but it is a process, it takes time. And so for both properties, we ask for the community's patience as we continue to shepherd those along. Next slide. Westy wins. So the month of March was Women's History Month, and here with our city workforce, we had a great celebration and panel discussion on Wednesday, March 29th in honor of Women's History Month. We have a former, if you will, diversity, equity, inclusion, access, belonging committee that has rebranded itself as Belong Explanation Point. So the Belong group is the one that coordinated this, set it up. It was outstanding. We had 3 female panelists that shared stories of their own personal and professional journey. Our Deputy City Manager, Barbara Opie, she was the one who moderated the event. And frankly, we had a packed house. We met over at College Hill Library in the large classroom training room where we were this past October with the council for some team building, and it was packed house. In fact, the fire marshal was standing there counting noses as we walked in to make sure we weren't over capacity. But great event, and so I would certainly chalk that up as a Westy win. Next slide. Some things to know: PRNL Open House Thursday, April 6th, 4 to 6 p.m. That's down at Irving Street Library. Our next council meeting is here in council chambers, April 10th, beginning at 6:30 with the pre-meeting. College Hill Library is also celebrating its 25th birthday on Tuesday, April 18th, and so you can visit the library during the week of the 17th to the 21st for any activities and some gifts for all ages, so a great event there. And then the Westminster Archive Center is holding its grand opening celebration. That's on Tuesday, April 18th from 3 to 5 p.m., also at College Hill Library. And so that was a new initiative to document city historical records and things. So those are the things to know. Next slide. Council was provided with a information-only document that spoke to the redevelopment and adaptive reuse toolkit update. Next slide. And as always, we would like the community to reach out and contact us We will be accessible, we will be responsive, we will be transparent, and we will certainly be accountable. If you want to talk to me, you can certainly do that by calling the number listed on the screen, 303-658-2006. You can email me directly at mfreitag@cityofwestminster.us. And as always, encourage you to follow us on Twitter, like us on Facebook, check us out on Instagram, or ring our bell at next door. Pending any questions, that's all I have this evening.
Anyone? Let's get on with the fun.
Okay. So Mayor, Mayor Pro Tem and councilors, our first presentation is an update on some legislative items that we wanted to bring to your attention. And I'll ask our Policy and Budget Coordinator, Teresa Boko, to please come forward, along with Amy Atwood, our State Legislative Liaison. So I'll turn it over to Teresa. You going to start us out?
I will.
Okay, thank you.
Good evening, Mayor, Mayor Pro Tem, councilors. Teresa Boko, Policy and Budget Coordinator, Amy Atwood, and John Preisner are here this evening to talk with you about 3 bills that we would have brought to your attention that with recommended positions. So this evening, we'll do an overview of each bill. We'll provide some brief bullet points on each recommended position and why, and then we'll look to you for direction on the recommended position. So we will start off with House Bill 231135, which is concerning the offense classification for indecent exposure in view of a minor. This is a bill that, under current law, indecent exposure is a Class 1 misdemeanor, except that it is a Class 6 felony for a third or subsequent offense. This bill makes indecent exposure a Class 6 felony if committed in view of a person who is under the age of 18 years of age. We're looking for we're recommending a support position, as this is aligned with our public safety principles and the legislative policy statement, that we recognize the critical importance of maintaining public order, providing a safe environment, protecting the lives of property of the citizens of Westminster, and we support legislation that provides resources and support to all victims of crime, particularly violent crimes, to include domestic violence. So at that point, I'll turn it over to all of you to see if you're in agreement with our recommendation.
Did anybody have any questions on this one? Councilor Baker?
So really, how many citizens of Westminster would these 2 bills affect?
I don't know.
Mayor, Mayor Pro Tem, Councilors, Norm Hobart, Chief of Police. Counselor, specifically, are you talking about how many people would have been charged under the statute that we would now charge as a
Well,
felony?
More, how many victims do we have? And then that would relate to how many people are charged.
I think last year we had less than a half a dozen victims ultimately within the city that we would be able to charge this with.
And that is in both categories?
That is in both categories within both counties.
And so there were half a dozen victims and 3 perpetrators?
I don't know if I can say how many perpetrators there were. I know that there were at least, there were less than a half a dozen victims total. I don't remember exactly how many perpetrators there were.
And most of the time, you don't understand the outcome, so maybe this isn't a question for you. How would this affect the outcomes of those cases?
Well, the outcomes, there's much more of the felony courts have a lot more jurisdiction over juveniles than the misdemeanor courts do. And so what we're looking for, with the adults, what we're looking for is to have the felony hanging over them, so the courts have more jurisdiction over those folks when they do victimize a juvenile.
So, I mean, like 95% of cases are plea bargain. When I plea bargain, they're arranged with the prosecuting attorneys. You know, if any of ours went to trial, or were they all of the disposed of?
That I don't know, sir.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Any other questions? Is every thumbs up if you're in support of the support? Support. I see us in support.
Moving on to HB 231249, concerning measures to improve outcomes for young children by replacing justice involvement with community-based services. So under the current law, counties are permitted to form a local collaborative management program to provide services to youth. This bill requires every county to participate in local collaborative management program and requires that program to serve children 10 to 12 years of age and to form a service and support team to create plans for children 10 to 12 years of age that are charged with a crime. So this bill removes children who are 10 to 12 years of age from the juvenile court jurisdiction and instead would funnel them over to a county, to a local collaborative management program. And there is where the plans would be put in place. The concerns with this bill from staff perspective is that the CMP model, the County Management Program model, it doesn't have the accountability that is involved with the juvenile justice system as it currently designed. And a particular concern is that aggravated offenses such as sexually violent crimes these individuals would be routed to the county management program versus a juvenile justice program. The juvenile justice through this legislation, the concern is that the juvenile justice program will lose the ability to have an impact on these individuals through the process that is currently in place and the accountability that is built into the juvenile justice system as it is right now. And also that an intervention with people at that age will then, because if they don't funnel into the system until they're 13, there could be graver concerns, graver offenses that happen if this intervention isn't effective. So, and then the other piece of this from the other side is the victim's rights. So while in the county management program, the victim can voice concerns, it does not provide the same level of involvement and offender responsibility as the juvenile justice system. So with this in mind, staff's recommendation is to oppose based on those principles of again, public safety principles of the legislative policy statement.
Kim?
So I feel like they tried to push something like this last session, if I remember right. So on top of like your concerns, and maybe this is a question for the police department, I feel like there have been instances of pretty severe, call it, charges on people who are under 13 in the city. I mean, to me, my concern is that I feel like it probably comes out of a good place, but I feel like we actually see offenders who would meet that age criteria that probably need to be in the system. So, I mean, would I be right in that assessment?
Mayor Pro Tem, Councilors, Norm Hobart, Chief of Police. Mayor Pro Tem, to your point, you're 100% right. We have violent offenders that meet this parameter that would no longer be eligible to be in court.
And I feel like I want to say that the judge had spoke about something similar to this last session. So I just want to make sure that, that I think it's important actually for the public to understand that, because if you hear the ages 10 to 12, most of the time you do think, that's a baby. I mean, all of us who are parents have went through that, but unfortunately there are circumstances where people who, live different life end up in pretty harsh crime situations. And so I support the oppose, but I also, thank you for helping me clarify, because I think it's important for our citizens to understand why we would oppose this. So,
Mayor Pro Tem, just a couple of points on that. The last legislative session, there was a bill. It was tabled for studying only. They studied it, and we're back again this year with more recommendations. And just for your point, we have the records are sealed, so I have to be very limited on what I say. We're working a homicide case, and the suspect is under 13.
thank you. I appreciate the clarification.
Councilor Namella?
So what wasn't overly clear to me is just the difference between how the juveniles would be, like what happens to them if they go into the CMP, the county system versus, and what kind of accountability might be over there, what kind of services, like how is it differentiating? Why are the bill makers saying it's better to do that versus the accountability that we can have here?
three chiefs of police sat in front of Representative Armagost, and we asked a similar question, and we left really with not a lot of answers. What this does is it takes it out of the juvenile court. The juvenile court ultimately has authority to mandate counseling, mandate jail time, mandate things for the family and for the offender to do certain things. This is more of a suggestive process. Under the collaborative management program, there's no teeth if the offender decides, you know what, I'm not going to counseling. They can't hold the parents accountable, and ultimately they can't hold the kid accountable if the kid decides, I'm not doing this. So it really puts us as public safety officials in a jam because we're not providing public safety. It puts the victims in a jam because they're not getting those services that they would be guaranteed under the Victims' Right Act because it's no longer falls under that parameter. And ultimately, they have that ability to go, I'm not doing this. It puts it in the hands of each of the counties into their child protective services. Child protective services are already understaffed and can't respond to everything that they're doing, but yet we're gonna saddle them with more cases. And they go to a hearing, and ultimately the collaborative management program has a hearing, and they're the ones that ultimately decide what may or may not be best for this child. And they may decide, you know what, charges aren't appropriate. So now you as the victim family have no legal repercussions because there are no charges. And we can't go back, and we don't have a second alternative to take them somewhere else to go, this didn't work here, let's move them into the juvenile court system. That's gone. So we even at the municipal level, for a kid, 10, 11, 12, that maybe needs to be into the system for some of that counseling and some of that, to re-educate them, and that piece of it, it's out of our system, it's out of our hands.
Do we feel like we've been successful in re-educating kids at that age?
I think the system is flawed. I absolutely do. But to turn this over to an experimental program at this point in time, if this was up and running in other counties, to us to be able to look at it and go, this is working, then I think my position personally would be different. But just to take this, to throw away the juvenile court system for 10, 11, and 12-year-olds is not the mechanism that we need to move forward with.
Who supports, so what is the child, like the CPS, the Child Protective Services, do they have a position on this?
I don't know, you might, I don't know if they do. I know that the counties, individual counties are in opposition to it because they're not set up to do this. And so the unfunded mandate to now put this in place, and these are urban counties, they don't have the infrastructure within to do this and to set this up. So like the chief said, it's untested. We don't have an example of where it's working.
So they're not pulling this from another community or state that has something that's working successfully?
Not in Colorado.
Yeah.
Are there other states where this may be in place?
There could be, Counselor, I can't give you a definitive yes or no.
Do we have an idea of how many children that we're working with currently?
In Westminster, I do not, as it relates to state cases. I believe there were, I think the number that we saw was 800. 800 cases that this would affect at the felony level.
Statewide. Okay. Because I see this, because I'm not speaking on behalf of CASA, but as my volunteer in the last 6 years as a CASA volunteer, I support staff's position in this, and because we have thousands of kids in the system at the county level. If they are, so thousands of kids with a billion different branches to serve, if they're at the local level, we have ability to focus on one or two individuals better than we can thousands. And so that's why me personally agree with staff, just because my time as a volunteer, it makes sense to just, if you think of it even as a school setting, students do better in 20 student classrooms versus 100 student classrooms. when you could, not apples to apples here, but you can equate it to the similar. You know, you start to lose focus on how to help kids if the more you have, and so that's why I'm going to be supporting staff in that. So.
Anyone else? I know before your time, but Chief Burke helped us through a situation with a grandson, and he talked to the police chief of the other city. They had better background and honestly begged the family to press charges because of the situation. They could get this child help, and he fit this age group because they knew where he'd be headed because of the family's situation if they didn't. So that's the reason I support it. We've been there. Thumbs? You got it.
And the last piece of legislation this evening is Senate Bill 23213 concerning land use. The title's longer than that, but that's kind of the abbreviated title. So for an overview of this, again, we'll start with staff's recommend position as opposed, and then we'll kind of walk through that. So this bill represents the most sweeping attempt in recent Colorado history to remove local control and home rule authority from elected leaders and planning staff. And we feel it, through that process, negates the voice of residents and local communities. The bill dramatically expands state authority by imposing top-down zoning and land use standards on municipalities. This legislation does not recognize that local governments are best suited to address the needs of their communities, and it sets aside decades of efforts and planning by local government to advance thoughtful, strategic solutions that best meet each community's unique needs. Most importantly, I think all parts of this are important, but the bill primarily applies to municipalities whose residents have chosen to adopt home rule charters under Article 20 of the Colorado Constitution. Zoning has long been recognized by the Colorado Supreme Court as a matter of local concern, and where the General Assembly has no authority. So, as outlined in the position paper, there's 4 main areas of the city's legislative policy statement that this impacts. Home rule and local control, that we oppose any legislation that attempts to weaken municipal home rule authority. We also oppose legislation that mandates state intervention in matters of local concern. State and federal mandates, the policy states that we oppose unfunded state and federal mandates that impose unfair financial burdens on municipalities and their residents. We oppose legislation under our land use section that prescribes we oppose legislation that prescribes comprehensive land use and other community planning efforts at the state level. And it reads kind of backwards, but we support appropriate water conservation efforts and sustainable water resource management, which we're very concerned that this will impact the amount of time and comprehensive plan that has went into the water resources that are needed to support the community and the planning efforts that have been put forth in the comprehensive plan. So for all these reasons, we are recommending an opposed position. So we'll turn it over for discussion, see if you're in agreement.
Miller?
Okay, I've read through this thing several times, believe it or not. And yeah, I don't argue with any of the statements that you have. I would say there's still room in the conversation about this bill to make amendments that would actually be significant. You know, I think without participating in that amendments discussion, we run the risk of it being worse than better. Some of the language around water, for example, needing to have, it's like there's certainly a lot of work and a lot of reporting on an annual basis that's in there, and having the ability to, even if, so, sure, this may not go forward, but I think it's useful if it does go forward that we push for things like, hey, we don't want to have annual reporting. We would like to, either sync it up with the 5-year, with our water supply master plan timing or any other water analyses that we do, the housing plans that are required for with that bill or every 5 years. So there's some distinct things that could lessen the impact of staff time. There's language in there regarding the water, the ability for a city to be able to say, hey, we don't have enough water. There's a lot of communities just like us. I mean, look at Thornton.
Said no.
Well, they don't have any additional water to utilize. And that is something that they're working on, fixing the language so that that cities can say, yeah, we have a water supply master plan. We don't have the water, and here's here's our plan. Here's what we need to. Here's what we're showing, and so I think there is some autonomy with cities. I think so. While I don't think it's probably as I don't think it's as bad as everyone has kind of made it out to be. There are aspects that do give us control. They do need to be massaged. A lot of the language, I think Governor Polis did say he pulled from other states. I think other states have different conditions. And we do know our communities best, and there's so many things that we could be in the conversation to help make this a more workable bill if it goes through. So that's, whether we want to say oppose with amendment, I don't know how you do that, but I would just, I would say let's not turn our back. Let's be, let's be talking to the state. So that's where I'm at.
Mayor Pro Tem?
I appreciate where you're coming from, but I have to say, I've said in the past before, there are times where you can be at the table and there's a time when you say, hell no. And to me, this is a time that it's opposed and, hey, we're ready to lawyer up. And I think that's where a lot of municipalities are, in my opinion. Because, I mean, the idea of working with them to give us rights that we already have that they want to take away is my concern. Because I really see that's what this bill does. This is a huge overreach. And if this works in other states, I welcome Governor Polis to go to those states, because this isn't Colorado. Colorado has a lot of municipalities who have home rule. That's how our systems are set up. We have, we hear it all the time. We're in an arid desert, and, we have a finite amount of water. We're the ones that are responsible for that water. So the idea of somebody at the state capitol deciding what we're going to build and how we're going to build it and where we're going to build it, to me, it's dangerous. And so I am very, very strongly opposed to it, and I'm glad to see that that's the position that we're taking, because I don't even understand how that would work. I mean, the amount of bureaucracy that we want to add to something that's already very complex, I don't think it's going to be productive for our community specifically. I can't imagine that it's going to be productive for other communities in the Front Range, but so I support the oppose.
Anyone?
My views are in writing and they're out there in public. I think this is an egregious violation of our Constitution. Also, the process was a violation. I mean, just from no stakeholder input. We keep talking about a housing crisis. Well, I'm reading articles from Portland, Maine to Portland, Oregon, that housing is an issue. So I'm wondering how our state legislatures would put themselves in a position of the federal government coming down and telling them how to run their business as well. So I think just on the constitutionality of it, that is a critical part of that, and the fact that I don't care who it is. If there's not stakeholder input, it's not good policy making. So that's where I stand.
And from that CML town hall, I think one of the questions was asked about, can we amend? And even CML said, we're not gonna take that stance because there's too much in here that we can't amend. And I think one of the biggest takeaways for me is that, if that really was the goal, there should have been prior discussion in partnership with municipalities ahead of time. Instead of coming down and having a strong arm and saying, you're the problem and here's what we're gonna do about it. That's not a partnership to me. That is authoritarian and not okay. The second biggest takeaway was that the understanding is that DOLA would become a regulatory body over the municipalities, which means that at that point, like Councilor Seymour said, they don't need public input. They can make decisions as they see fit, which then we lose that public community process of having a say in the community. And so that was the two biggest pieces for me that I couldn't get on board with, and made me decide, like, this is an oppose and not an amend, because I think that was discussed in the town hall, like, can we amend? Can we work with this? And they said no. So.
Councilor Baker?
I am on board with, the Mayor Pro Tem and Councilors Emmons and Seymour, that this is a terrible thing and we should oppose it strongly. And lawyer up.
I was just gonna say, in some of the meetings that I've been in, having Dr. Cog be more of a vehicle for having conversations with, and actually being the body that actually works with the cities to develop the, this legislation further and or monitor, that is something that, again, I think should be pushed for. Again, I'm just going back to, it's not perfect at all, and we need to have, I feel like it's important to have a voice. And I know you guys, I know where you're all standing. I don't like to let things happen to me. I like to be able to, get in what we can if it is moving forward. So I'll leave it there.
Councilor Baker?
I also think that we should use DORA to really strongly oppose this too. That we should try to persuade, not DORA, Dr. Cog, to strongly oppose this vigorously. And that should be our input at the Dr. Cog meeting.
Mayor, if I could respond, we have received a request from Dr. Cog to share what the council's perspective is specifically on this bill with them tomorrow, and so Assistant City Manager Lindsay will do that tomorrow, so whatever you all decide, we'll communicate that to Dr. Cog. Okay, sorry.
I'm trying to remain calm. My blood pressure, good. I agree with everything people said. I'm glad he went and talked to some people, but he was very picked off people that, he didn't talk to everybody. He did not do that across the board. And any good leader would talk to anyone and everyone. I've been in Metro Mayor's caucuses where I can tell you everybody that's been talked to, and I can tell you everybody that hasn't been talked to. I said at the beginning, when we knew this was coming, not one hair of this ugly bill should get under the tent, because that's all. Then they just take it all. And that's what this bill's trying to do. I almost did start laughing when I read about the transit-oriented communities. He obviously hasn't been from Westminster to Longmont, because with all of our stops that haven't been built since 2004, and we only have one stop, but the other stops, if he stopped and looked at the corridor, they are built out exactly how he's looking, and he's short-sighted. It's done. And we have no rail. We have no transit. We don't have a system that works. RTD's struggling. So you can have all of this, but when you don't have transit, people do need cars, and they have to get to places. And so it is so flawed, and it is so horrible. I am not willing to negotiate one thing on this paper or this bill because there's nothing good about it. And I know it probably will pass because they have the votes to pass it. But I hope CML has the lawyers ready to go to court because I'll be there with them. This is wrong. It says to our communities, it doesn't matter what you want. We're going to tell you what you want. This is wrong to the core. And there's no room for discussion because it's so bad. So thumbs for oppose.
Go.
And with that, I will be signing CML's letter. I will be signing MCC's letter. And I would encourage everybody to get on to CML's letter because they need all the.
And before we have our lobbyists leave, I'd like to make one more appeal. I think we're talking about the quality of life for more than 1,000 of our residents. Could be several thousand of our residents. And I also know, the political calculus here, but these are our friends at the legislature. And they're on the verge of doing something truly terrible. I think it would be really remiss on our parts if we don't at least remind them.
Specifically, which ones are you talking about? Because one of the ones that dropped, well, some of them passed already, and I think they're headed to the governor's desk. And then the one that they would refer to as assault weapons, although I would argue that they don't know what that term means, that one actually died out, and I think it died in committee.
That has died in committee?
That did die in committee
Okay.
a couple days ago.
And really, what about the age bill?
The age bill is headed to the governor's desk.
Okay. And what about the red flag?
That one's headed to the governor's desk. I don't know what amendments or changes happen with it. I know specifically, and the waiting period one passed too, which I was following that one closely because I personally, in my own, not my council hat, but recommended that they look at something with, and I know that this was argued at the legislature, and I don't think it made it in, but to give ability for somebody who's a victim of a crime or under a protection order, they tried to get that amendment to allow those folks to not have to have the waiting period, but that looks like that didn't make it in.
Do we use our really lobbyists to really speak with the governor?
That's a council decision, a council direction that as council you would give me.
On the ones that are going to the governor, I think it'd be good of us to speak up.
My opinion is, as it was before, as far as it's not necessarily under our stead. I would, if there was an ability to, if there were any of them that I think it makes sense, it's that specific amendment that I'm frustrated with. If the rest of council wants to throw that at him, I'd be happy to back that. The other ones, probably not my cup of tea, but not enough that I think that we step outside of the things that we've put on our lobbyist plate. I do think it's frustrating though that they didn't listen to the discussion around an amendment for people who are under protection order that might benefit safety-wise to be able to not have that 3-day waiting period.
To me, we haven't had the discussion, so it's difficult to go from not having a discussion to going to the governor.
I think, and this, I'll try to be consistent in this, is I think it's outside of our lobbying protocols. Does it, if we took an opinion on everything that affected our residents, especially this session, we'd be in here all night every Monday night. So I believe this is outside of that. Nope. I have a comment on 213 when we're done with this.
Well, I don't disagree with your thoughts. I also don't disagree with your thoughts. Because I do believe that the state gave municipalities to have a say in this regard. And so I don't think it's outside of our purview to have a say in that. I mean, if it's something that the majority of council would like to support, I'll be on board with it. I'm more on board with your amendment to, have that conversation. I'll be blatantly honest that based on 213, I don't even think having a voice will even matter. I just don't have any faith in that. So, yes, go ahead.
On Mayor Pro Tem's amendment, because it is on its way to the governor's desk, he cannot make changes. So he either signs it or he vetoes it. So the opportunity for that passed, and they did work on that in both chambers, and it didn't pass, that amendment.
I seem to recall that, that was one of the things that they
Yep.
actually had at least a discussion about.
Through the weekend.
And then when it comes to having a voice, I'd like us just to remember that, particularly on the domestic violence bill, on 1222, where we took an amend position last time, we are continuing to work with the advocates of that bill and the judges as well, and we do have a voice. So it depends on the issue, but Westminster is still certainly looked at as a leader within public safety, as well as within the courts and within housing. With an opposed position, it doesn't mean that we aren't still going to be working to oppose the bill, to try to make it so it dies. But if things turn and we need to look at amendments just because we're opposed, it doesn't mean we don't still review language. In the past, when language comes across, because like you said, we don't want to know what's happening. So I will make sure that I'm in the thick of those conversations and have been with CML. There's a core group of us lobbyists within CML who are working on this, so I'm really glad we took a position tonight. And it's all a go, as well as committee is on Thursday, and we'll have comments prepared for Thursday as well. So we definitely are at the table.
And let me clarify, I didn't mean like Westminster specifically, like I know that you bring a voice for us. I'm just speaking in general municipal terms that clearly sometimes messages conflict.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. If it's heartening, it's happening at the county level too.
Anything else on this issue?
Oh, just 213, like.
Well, let's finish the gun. Are we done with the gun and we have no action? You want?
Thumbs? Can we do thumbs?
Tell me what you want.
I would like us to take a position, so
On
that
what?
would be the thumbs
Because I
up.
have not read any of the gun bills, so I have no clue what you're asking for.
I would like to take, like a position on the waiting time, to reject that. I absolutely agree with, really Mayor Pro Tem. I'd like to take a position on the red flag bill, because the red flag bill, one of the things that is never talked about, and technically, the guarantee of the Constitution, where you get to face your accusers, and you get to bring evidence in your defense, and you get to bring witnesses in your defense, that doesn't happen with the red flag bill. Now, I understand the technical term that they're accusing the guns and not the person, and therefore the guarantees of the Constitution do not apply. I fully understand that. But for me, it's a principle. And you should always be able, in court, to challenge accusers against you, to hear the evidence against you, to bring evidence in your defense and witnesses in your defense. And right now, red flag hearings are secret trials. And I so strongly object to that. So it's on the waiting time, the secret trials, and the age. Currently, 18-year-olds have to register for selective service. Right now, 18-year-olds cannot buy a handgun, but they can buy a long gun. How many 18-year-olds do we have in the city of Westminster? My really estimate's about 3,000. How many of them want to buy a gun? 1 in 10? That's 300. That's 300 citizens. They say half are male and half are female. 150 males were fined saying they have to register for really selective service, but they can't buy a long gun. I find that especially since there's 3. I do not know.
And your ask would be for the governor to veto?
And these three have already passed?
Well, I guess our lobbyist said they have passed both houses and now been sent to the governor for his either signature or veto, or he does nothing.
So how many want our lobbyists to go and talk to the governor to veto those bills?
It's worth a shot.
Talking about conversation.
Okay. On,
Died.
back to 213, would we be willing to have a resolution that we voted on? Not just here, but at the dais, a resolution opposing 213? That'd be of any value?
The position paper works great. I think CML has a draft resolution that they've been floating for cities if they want to do that as well. I use the position paper and actually take that with me when I go speak to legislators, but if you want to do a resolution as well, it doesn't hurt.
I think it's a fine idea.
I like to do it. I think I wrote that too all. It just sets.
Wants a resolution?
No, it's yours.
I see.
Timing on that?
Monday?
Monday,
Monday the
council
10th?
next Monday, yeah.
Yep. Okay. Got it. We can do that.
On 213, I was going to say, just in response to Councilor Baker's request about Dr. Cobb, I think it's on the agenda for this Wednesday, so I fully understand all of the concerns, and so we'll be prepared.
And did you have something else? Oh,
No, that was it,
a
the resolution. Yep.
Anybody else have? Did I see another hand for 213? Gone, okay.
Okay, all right, thank you, Mayor. Thank you, everybody. So Mayor Pro Tem, councilors, our second presentation is on the City Council 2023 outreach proposal and discussion. If you remember, back in early January, we got together and in study session and asked the council for their ideas about things that you would like to do to engage the community. Heard lots of great ideas, but frankly, there were lots of great ideas. It was a lot of stuff. And so I took that information, I went back to our strategic comms folks and Kit Redmer, our community outreach liaison, and said, let's take the feedback that we got and then let's put it into something that's executable, that we can actually accomplish, because we couldn't do everything that everybody wanted. So that's what you have in front of you today, along with a request that put dates, times, some specificity to the activities. And so what I would propose, and I know Mr. Redmer has some commentary that we'll let him do, but it may be worthwhile that we just run through those, how many ever items that are proposed. And if you have recommended changes or adjustments, we do that. Or if you say we want to delete it, because I know that from previously talking to the mayor, I know she has some concerns. So it may be worthwhile to just work through those individually of whether you do them or whether you don't do them. So with that, I'll turn it over to Mr. Redmer and let him run with it, okay?
Okay, thank you, sir. Mayor Pro Tem, councilors, good evening. And thank you again for another opportunity to discuss the outreach calendar for the remainder of 2023. As Mark said, we took your input into account, or at least tried to. Both the input that I received on January 9th in the study session, as well as some of your follow-up emails. So thank you very much for that. And without further ado, as Mark suggests, if it's okay, we could just go through the calendar. And if you all can please, let us know if you agree with the proposed activity. If you'd like to change it, we're all ears. So, if everybody has, I have extra calendars too, if anybody needs one.
May 18th, we have a town hall. For me, First of all, we missed our first full quarter. So I'm going to ask that this scheduling goes in through the first quarter of 2024, so we don't do that again next year. But I remember distinctly, we talked about May and what kind of month May was. So the first thing I see is May 18th, and I haven't had time to go look and see how many graduations that week or that night or whatever, but May is a crazy month, and I just share that. Anyone else?
That day specifically, I have North Metro Arts Alliance.
If, I'm sorry. If I can add, there is no day, week, time that's not busy. That's why I look at our calendars, and, you know, the thing is are we willing to have events when not everyone's there, like a town hall? I'm okay with that, because there's a couple on here that I won't be available for. But it's more about what is the other, 115,000 residents of our city, then the adults or whatever. They're not all one body, and so throwing a date out and putting it down, it's going to be as good as any other. If we tried to coordinate a calendar like this from a year-long standpoint, I don't know how we would do that. But, I'm just, we pick a date, we pick a part of the city, and if we have 100 people show up, it's a win. The ones that don't have graduations, that don't have kids in school, out of school, whatever, I'm way past that point now. If it was however many years ago, yeah, I wouldn't have been able to do anything in May. But, there's a certain segment that we're going to reach with each one of these. Will we reach them at that date or the topic or no topic?
I was probably more frustrated because we haven't had one, and it's 5.5 months into the year, we finally land one, so. Who did I see? Mayor Pro Tem?
I agree with both of you. I mean, my frustration is that it's in May. My preference would be that we're having in person, and I understand we can't do everything, but going into next year, I think it's important to have this feedback too. And I think that, like last year, I think we were very intentional in doing the town hall. So, if we could make sure that we do one each quarter, that's an in-person one, I think that would be good for the council to be in front of the residents that often. And then to do a telephone town hall, maybe, half the year. So do 2 of those, just because I think that part of the reason we're doing the telephone versus in person is more about the people who can't make it in person. So being kind of splitting those out and not only giving one bite at the apple for folks that are only going to participate that way, I think makes sense. The only other, so at this point, we'll make do. My only really big objection to the things that you have on here is you have 2 different ones that are during the work day and they're both during business days. So, and I think it's just 2. They're September 28th and October 12th. Those are both 3 to 6. The majority of council has day jobs, and those are both, I think, on Thursdays. I think that's, maybe they're great events for the community, but I wouldn't put them in the guise of council outreach, because that's going to be really difficult potentially for us to be able to make those.
Okay, we're just talking about May 18th. We're going to go down these one by one. So we'll get to it.
Well, now you got my list for you.
Counselor Baker.
I will use Mayor Pro Tem's tack and look at them all, and I think they're fine. And I don't think we should have as a goal that every one of us attend every one of these things. I don't think that's the goal. And for me, the 3 major ones are the town halls, because that's where the biggest cross-section of the city will show up. I think some of the other ones, by their very nature, are going to limit their crowd, but that's fine. This is a hard thing we're doing.
I do. I know we're supposed to be talking about May 18th, but just in general, I would like to see more. I do agree with Mayor Pro Tem. I liked his ideas about just having more, like 1 per quarter. and to mix it up with the telephone versus in person. I really like that the location is at some points at schools. I think it's a great way to connect to some of our community members, and maybe because these two are at schools, maybe the other two might be at, a rec center or something like that to kind of diversify who we might get. And obviously, geography is important as well.
Absolutely.
So everybody's good for the 18th? June 2nd, block party, that's down in historic Westminster. Are we having a tent, or what are we doing there?
Yes, ma'am, 10 booth.
And what are we handing out?
We'll have caps and frisbees, as well as other information.
June 14th, I don't see that as an outreach. That's where we come and talk to the 20 citizens that are going through our class. I don't see that at all as, that's just a council duty. So we could take that off the list.
I won't be able to make the 2nd or the 24th in June.
So did I hear correctly, we're gonna take June 14th off
Off
the
of this
list?
calendar.
It's
We-
still gonna be on
It's
council
on our
calendar.
calendar,
Right, but it's just not
an
part of the
outreach.
outreach calendar,
No,
okay?
because it's only to the 20 or whatever people sign
Okay.
up. June 24th, Public Safety Open House. Again, there, if we're gonna do this, I think we need a tent where people know it's council. And if people wanna do shifts or whatever, I just think either that or you just attend, but we need to decide. Is it gonna be something we're gonna have presence at with a booth so we can talk to people? Or do you just wanna come whenever you wanna come, look around, happen to talk to whoever you want to? Or if this is gonna be on, to me, we need a tent and we need a purpose.
Agree, and make it so, if you want to be there a whole time, but we need to make sure that,
Somebody's there.
somebody's there, a couple of us. Yeah,
Everybody good?
So I'm tracking,
That's good.
it's all good, just have a physical location where the council rotates through.
Yep.
Okay.
That people, and we need signage so people know
Sure.
where the council. July 4th, I do not see 4th of July at the park as a city council outreach. We have, that's a crazy day. We don't have a tent there unless you want a tent there. But it's Westy Fest, that's a different thing. The Brew Fest, any of the fests that we have. But the city park one, people start coming at 7 in the morning. And unless we have a booth where people know they can come talk to us, it would just be us mingling as we're over there anyway. So I don't see that as a true contact with us, unless you want to change it to a booth.
it's a little crazy of a day to have a booth,
Yeah,
unless we're selling food, then we can make some money.
all right, we're taking that one off.
Scratching July 4th.
Yep.
Still
We'll
on-
be there. But
Still on our calendar, but
Yep.
yeah.
Yep.
The same with the McFall renaming ceremony. That is an event, not an outreach, and I wouldn't have that on outreach.
I won't be able to make that one. That's my
Everybody good with that? Pull that off?
Yeah.
Okay.
Calendar.
July 27th, Town Hall. My concern is we need to change the time. I think you need people to need to be able to get home, have dinner, so I would propose 7 to 8:30 p.m. Any no's? Sir?
for July, well, I'm just thinking of the cadence of, if we're trying to have, and maybe this would be just a good question to air out the thoughts on, do you want to have, as Mayor Pro Tem sort of suggested, the 4 town halls a year, each quarter, and then kind of fitting in the telephone town halls wherever, or, 1, 2 a year? Because I would think we're a little bit late, so May is sort of the end of, or, we're kind of in the middle of second quarter, And somewhere, August gets kind of insane for having a town hall. Well, maybe actually the town, let's see. I guess September could be the third quarter one. Okay, I take it back.
I just think with vacations and stuff this way, you have a
Yeah.
better chance of getting people at
I
home.
might actually be on vacation, but I can call in.
Yeah.
Town hall, that's phone. No one knows where you are.
Okay, so are we good with the 27th, but change it to
Yeah.
7 PM
Yeah.
to 8:30?
7 to 8:30. Okay.
August 11th, movie in the park at Irving Street. I assume we're having a tent? August 20th is a Sunday. Is there no way we could do a Saturday?
I will double check with Covenant Village, but I will confirm that.
So looking at 19th, same time, just on the 19th. Mr. Edmer, good?
Got it.
Got it.
Bean Donuts will pack them in there.
Okay.
I would think with their church services and two, that wouldn't, anyway.
That's
I
right, they
just-
do it in the big hall.
Yep. September, Town Hall at Crown Point, 6:30 to 8. Everybody okay?
Looks good.
The 28th, Bishop Park Community Meeting. This is 3 to 6. Kids are going to school later. Some of the elementaries don't get out now till 3:25. Parents are getting home. I just think that's a horrible time, but that's just me. Plus, we've got counselors that work.
And I do understand that, but the two park recreation library events on, like at Squires Park, to get the input on the park, catching everybody right there as they came out of school, you know, even if younger, and the parents that were there waiting for the kids early to get out, it was just packed, lots of people. So, I mean, it's a big draw, especially that time of year. The weather's generally great, and so, you know, it's just one of those, yeah, not everybody can make it kind of things, but that one at Squires Park was, kid had to run and get hot dogs like 5 times, so.
And it's a barbecue, so it's,
Yeah.
you know, it's late afternoon, dinner time.
Yeah.
I mean, I appreciate that, but I think for some of us, then if it's a council outreach, you guarantee that certain council members aren't gonna be able to make that. I mean, so that's my only thing with it. Like, I think it's fine, and it's one of those things that usually go on our calendars that we show up for anyway if we're doing outreach for something else. But if it's specifically council outreach versus we're doing outreach for a park or something, that's just my only.
Yeah, that was a totally different, in my head, mindset thing with Bishop Park and just asking families to come and eat and whatnot. I don't know. Mainly, I'm thinking our schedules, and if even half of us can't make it, that's just not fair. Because you don't have a choice.
So what do you want to do?
So, okay, can we push them to really Saturdays?
We won't get any turnout. I mean, I mean, minimal turnout. Soccer, this, that, everything else on Saturdays, families are,
Especially in the afternoon.
yeah. That was, you know, you kind of hook them where they are, so.
Oh,
See how they go. Maybe I mean, it might be one of those things that we have to drop by once we get off work. And that might just be the way that it goes, so you're rotating people in. And I mean, honestly, that's that far out. I don't know where I'll be working.
Yeah.
Somewhere, hopefully.
Well, and the
Hopefully
other,
somewhere.
the other thing that concerns me is if it's our outreach and only half of us can be there, I just don't want people coming to the dais and condemning people for not being able to be there. I just think 3 is way too early to get started.
How about 4 to 7?
I wouldn't make it that long. I'd just say 5 to 7. Because if you're working, you're at least able to, maybe get there.
5 to 7?
If you guys think that'll, you know, to.
We'll give it a
Counselor
try.
Seymour's
We can
Yeah,
try
worth
it.
a
We
try.
tried that on
Sure.
one of
We might
them.
miss some after-school kids, but we can definitely do it.
5 to 7.
Hook them with food, they'll come back.
Okay.
Ice cream usually
Put a
works.
trail of
And ice
Reese's
cream.
Pieces.
Did we already publish this anywhere?
Just on the agenda.
In the agenda.
Yeah, that's what we're working through tonight.
I just didn't know if it went out in activity guides or anything. Okay.
October 12th.
Kind of the same thing.
Or we could just use that as a guinea pig and keep it as is. And see how one versus another for time.
That's not a bad idea.
Okay,
Oh,
so
keep the time the same and compare
For
those
this-
two?
Yeah.
Okay.
October 12th stays 3 to 6.
And what do we do if
We're
it's
starting
snow?
to lose daytime or daylight at that
Yeah.
point.
We wear
It's
warm
probably
winter
no
coats and
event if it's
boots.
snow.
Enjoy some barbecue.
Well, There's
We will have
there's
10,
no
but-
indoor at this one.
Yeah.
Yes, ma'am, that's right. So, yeah, I think we probably cancel.
October 24th, residents at Maker Housing down on 71st. That's one that makes sense.
Coffee at night, though, is that supposed to be in the morning?
Coffee and tea. There's just their tea in there.
It's evening?
Coffee and ice cream.
That's
Coffee
what,
and,
that's what they
Lemonade.
prefer, actually.
yeah, coffee and anything.
Guess they're night owls.
Reese's Pieces.
Is that what they? I mean,
Dessert.
you know I drink
Yeah,
coffee.
dessert.
So,
So, yeah,
We'll have decaf coffee there, too.
there's no such thing.
December 2nd, I was telling City Manager Freitag, usually that is a day that, once council gets elected, we use as a get to know each other, and then head over to meet and greet, or the tree lighting. So when I saw, again, meet and greet town hall, and the craziness of that night, I know that they're thinking having cookies and hot chocolate inside. When I was here 10 years ago, that's what we did every year, but we didn't, and so anybody could be in there to stay warm, number one. But for us, again, to be out there as an outreach calendar, to do that, if we're doing our council piece to get to know one another with the new council, heading to that event, I just think that event is chaotic enough that we don't need a meet and greet there.
do we want to look at, because the fourth quarter, we don't have a town hall. So,
We're
Yeah,
right on the
holidays.
edge of that, though. I mean, the end of September, or right on the end of third quarter. But
That's
do
the
we want
reason
to
I've
force one
said
in?
that I wanted them to go now through March of 2024.
Yeah, I mean, on that note, I would think that we would want to do one January because it is election year and we don't know who sits there, and that's an opportunity for the first new council to be able to have a town hall after the holidays and stuff.
Makes a lot of sense.
So back to December 2nd, do we not want to do this?
I don't think I think it's like what it has been. We hand stuff out at that typically. We give glasses out, those of us who can make it. I just wouldn't put it on. I don't
Yeah,
think that's
it's
a,
just,
Everybody else.
it's crazy and fun, but it's controlled chaos.
plus we're competing with Santa.
Yes.
How do we rank?
Can't see Santa until after the lights.
That's right. No council, no Santa.
They'll trick them.
Okay, and then go into January and have a regular town hall then.
You want us to take the plan through March as you originally talked about?
Yeah.
Okay, so what we'll do is if the council's okay, we're gonna go ahead and lock in these on schedules that you've approved tonight with the amendments, changes. And then we'll come back to you with what that first quarter of 2024 looks like, so January to March, kind of same format. And, we'll come up with the plan and you guys say yay, nay, change the time, change the location, et cetera. Fair enough? Okay, all right, we can do that. Thank you.
The weather's gonna be better this year.
Okay, Kit, you good?
Good,
Tracking?
thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you, everybody.
Anything else?
Yes, so the coup de grace of the evening,
that's
Mayor,
right,
we've
I
got an
forgot.
executive session.
How could I
we get a
forget?
break before we
Oh.
do this.
Could I ask one more thing? How much are we thinking about spending for like a consultant for the toolkit?
Ooh, good question. Economic Development Director, Kimball, how much are we going to spend on the toolkit consultant?
We currently have allocated $75,000.
And we can't do it ourselves?
There is, I would say there's a lot of base data mining that's a lot, very time consuming. We don't have the staff right now to pull together that data. Also requires the geomapping, GIS work. And there's, probably about 24 different data variables that we want to analyze for every parcel in the city. So a lot of what we're paying for is for their time to crunch all those numbers for us.
Adaptive reuse.
Yeah, adaptive reuse and toolkit. Well, because we spent a lot of money on the retail bit, didn't we?
We spent $25,000.
And how much are we using that?
We use it quite a bit to inform our strategies for recruitment. It helped inform the comp plan. It will also be helping inform and supporting our redevelopment toolkit effort.
But wasn't the retail plan supposed to help our retailers?
It helped.
Wasn't that who we made it for? And isn't this adaptive reuse toolkit for people thinking of doing adaptive reuse? Isn't that the target audience?
Sure, so if I understand your question, Councilor Baker, the retail study was actually more for staff to give us some good data on where our gaps were in our retail footprint, retail profile. So we would know where those gaps are, and also hyper-locally focused on different areas of the city. So we would know where we would need to employ that concept of retail pruning, where we may need to look at, then that informs a redevelopment toolkit. So maybe that's not the right place for retail anymore, but we have other parts of our city, such as in the north end of our city, in Foster's Farm, for example, where there are some new retail opportunities there and some new retailers who are unique to the region and sometimes to the state, who are now approaching us and looking at that area. So we're able to draw from that data that we have, and a third-party source, of course, is a lot more valuable than just myself or my staff telling someone that. That's our job. But when we can point to that third-party data and that analysis, it's much more powerful.
I didn't think we were doing so much of a directive control of where retail or where readaptive use is.
Certainly not. I am not an advocate for that personally. So what we're trying to do is understand where, if someone comes to us, and this happens quite often, either, for example, a site selector for a retailer, their broker, and they'll say, well, you guys know the market. What do you guys think? Where's the best place? Are there any new pieces of data that maybe we aren't able to get from our own sources because they're not so hyper-local focused as we are, and also understanding the dynamics of the Denver metro region. So that's why having an advisor and an expert on the ground is so helpful to them. So we're not telling people to do anything. That's not what we're trying to do. But we're also trying to use that data so we can make better decisions for the city. So we can come to you and say, as your professionals, that this is a good deal. This will result in X, Y, Z for you. It's a fair deal. It's going to reap the following rewards for the next X number of years. So that's really what we're trying to do. The more knowledge we have, the better we can inform others. We hope the better job we can do at attracting those retailers who are going to continue to contribute to your sales tax base.
I just thought it was more organic to what the function of economic development was.
I guess I don't.
I thought adaptive reuse was just part of economic development, so you should be the experts and not rely on outsiders. But go ahead. You had a question?
Yeah, is that something that staff can bring? Because I've leaned on the retail study
Yeah.
multiple times in
Sure.
study sessions. I found it to be a useful tool for myself. And I think one of my biggest questions, and it's still not answered, is how is staff implementing what we've learned from the data that we've provided in the study? I think that will maybe help better understand, we have this data, now what are we doing with it? Because I think council often gets data to support decisions, but then I think some of the data is lost in the implementation as far as here's the data and here's how we're using it, so that we understand the cost benefit of why we went through that process. So if it's a majority of council, I would love to see, half an hour segment of, here's how we're using this study, and I think it will benefit us.
Would that be helpful to council?
Are we gonna do it before we hire the consultant?
That question is not before us, but I'm not sure how we, if I may ask a question of Director Kimball, how many staff members do you currently have?
I have 12, including myself.
Okay. And are any of them GIS experts?
No.
Okay. You can't gather this kind of data with someone in front of a computer. You need someone to actually pull this down and then to have that available. It's back to the question of, do we want to hire enough staff people in order to do this versus hiring out jobs and actually saving us money? Okay.
Can,
We need to get an answer on, do we want to do a study session?
right,
On the retail.
Feedback, right.
I just think it takes a lot of staff time.
Yeah.
So that's, we want them developing this toolkit or developing a study session that they could integrate this information when they come back with the toolkit. So that's just,
can we leave it up to them? What's the easiest way to do it?
We'll figure out a
All
way.
in one,
We'll figure
or
out a way.
whatever? It's up to you,
we can
not,
do that.
it's just something, and before we go in, I know we need a break, but I meant to ask over a month ago, when I was over at Frolic, the big Safeway, things are going on in there. Can it be told what's going on in there, or is that a secret? And if you can't, that's fine, I just haven't asked, and I haven't seen anything. It's okay,
Let me just double check
okay,
before I say.
all right,
Yes, ma'am, thanks.
Mayor Pro Tem?
Before we go into executive session, I apologize for not bringing this up earlier. I just want to remind everybody that the round table isn't going to happen this month. It won't be till May. But I did have a question follow-up because I had a conversation with a resident, and and hopefully my recollection is right. But council, because there's a lot of discussion about whether or not we're going to discuss lead in the round table or not. And there's a lot of folks, including myself at this point, that think that's not the right venue because FAA, that's for noise. But that doesn't mean that lead isn't a concern. And council majority did say they thought that was a concern. And so when we had that discussion before we decided to go back in the roundtable, and even after, one of the things we had asked staff was, can you talk with our partners at CDPHE and figure out who actually would be the proper person for us to discuss the concerns that folks have around lead. And so I don't know what the what the fruit of those conversations were. So I was just hoping, and obviously I don't expect this tonight, but if you could follow up with proper staff and figure out, was there any work that you could report back to us? Because I was having the conversation with a resident who called me, and I knew that we did put some level of effort behind that. I just couldn't answer where that's at.
I can certainly follow up. Let me just rally the troops tomorrow and we'll get an answer back, okay?
Perfect.
All right, I'll send that by email. Okay?
Anything else? 5-minute break.
Okay. Gotta have some popcorn. Come on now.
Since we were back in this room, I said it was popcorn.
go ahead and start speaking.
We have reason for executive session?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. The agenda tonight, tonight's study session proposes an executive session for the purpose of discussing the potential acquisition of real property related to future transit projects and strategy related thereto pursuant to Westminster Municipal Code 1113C2 and Colorado Revised Statute 2464024A.
I will go and ask council, poll you, if you're willing to go into executive session, and you'll keep what is said there confidential. Counselor Seymour,
Yes,
Yes.
give your names.
I'm sorry.
Oh,
She gave mine, so.
oh.
Gotta do the work.
Lemon says yes. Lindsay Emmons, yes.
Bruce Baker, yes.
Dave Demott, yes.
Sarah Normella, yes.
Nancy McNally, yes. We're in executive session, and it's 8:31.